Imagine being handed the most powerful title a woman could hold in the medieval world: Empress of Byzantium, ruler of the greatest Christian empire on earth. The crowds cheer, the gold gleams, the palace is enormous, and then, almost immediately, someone starts plotting to kill you. That was the reality for nearly every woman who wore the Byzantine imperial crown. The title of empress was not a reward, it was a target, and the women who held it paid extraordinary prices. In freedom, in safety, and all too often in blood. The Eastern Roman Empire was not like the courts of Western Europe. Constantinople sat at the crossroads of the known world. Its politics reflected that position: sharp, fast, utterly merciless. Power shifted with terrifying speed. An emperor could be on his throne one morning and blinded in his cell by nightfall. And the women beside them? They fell just as hard, and often faster. The very structure of the imperial court made an empress's life precarious from the start. She arrived at the palace, usually as a teenager. She was often chosen through an empire-wide bride show. Bureaucrats traveled every province, selecting the most beautiful girl they could find. She was then groomed, renamed, and married to a man she had probably never met. Her family back home now had exactly one card to play: her survival at court. If she lost favor, they lost everything, and losing favor was almost guaranteed. The empress's primary job was to produce a male heir, but that heir, once born, became her biggest political asset and her most dangerous liability at the same time. Sons grew up. Sons had advisors. Sons had ambitions. More than one Byzantine emperor looked at his aging mother and saw not a parent, but an obstacle. Empress Irene of Athens knew this better than anyone. She ruled as regent for her son, Constantine VI. He turned against her, stripped her of power, and exiled her to a monastery. Her response, years later, was to have him blinded. That punishment permanently disqualified him from ruling. She then declared herself emperor, not empress, emperor, the first woman to hold that title outright. It lasted 6 years. Then she was exiled herself. The monastery appears again and again in the stories of Byzantine empresses. When a woman became inconvenient, the standard solution was the veil. She was forced to take monastic vows. In Byzantine law, that permanently disqualified her from court life. The monastery was the empire's preferred method of removing women from the game. Quiet, technically pious, and permanent. But exile to a monastery was actually one of the better outcomes. The worse outcomes involved knives. Empress Eudoxia, wife of Emperor Arcadius, wielded enormous influence in the early 5th century. Too much influence, according to the church patriarch John Chrysostom. He preached sermons that were widely understood as attacks on her vanity and ambition. She had him exiled twice. He died in exile. Her reputation has suffered in the historical record ever since. That record was written mostly by monks and churchmen who were not exactly neutral. She died young at 36. The cause was recorded as a miscarriage. Whether that was natural or something more deliberate, historians have never been able to say. The role of the church was a double-edged sword for every empress. On one hand, she was expected to be a model of Christian piety, funding churches, feeding the poor, going on pilgrimage. This gave her genuine moral authority and public affection. On the other hand, church officials felt entitled to police her behavior, her speech, her dress, and her relationships. An empress who pushed past what the clergy considered appropriate would find herself denounced from pulpits across the empire. For a ruler whose legitimacy depended on divine favor, that was catastrophic. There was also the problem of widowhood. When an emperor died, his widow occupied a deeply ambiguous position. She was still Augusta, still officially exalted, but she had no independent claim to power. If she remarried below her station, she degraded the imperial dignity. If she remarried to someone powerful, she handed that man a direct path to the throne. If she refused to remarry and tried to rule alone, she faced constant conspiracy. Generals and senators would line up, each believing he had a better claim. There was no safe choice. What made all of this worse was the isolation. The empress lived in the gynaikeion, the women's quarters of the palace. She was surrounded by eunuchs, ladies-in-waiting, and servants. None of them could be entirely trusted, because all of them ultimately served the palace, not her. Information reached her filtered. Allies were unreliable. And the skills that might have helped her navigate this world were exactly the skills she had been denied since childhood. Legal training, military command, administrative experience, all of it withheld of. Some women found ways to survive, even to thrive. They built networks through religious patronage. They cultivated alliances with powerful eunuchs who could move through the palace freely. They played the game of perception with extraordinary skill, projecting piety and deference while quietly steering real decisions. But even the most successful empresses lived with the knowledge that everything could collapse at any moment. A whispered accusation, a faction's defection, a new favorite in the emperor's ear. That was all it took. The gold crown was real. The power could be real. But so was the danger. So was the loneliness. And so, far more often than history tends to remember, was the monastery, the exile, the blinding, and the blade. Being an empress in early Byzantium was not a life of privilege. It was a gamble. And in that palace, the house almost always won.